Good morning. Today we're going to talk about food forests, and I am going to define for you exactly what I mean when I say food forest. There are a lot of people who talk about food forests and who have different definitions of this phrase. And I have a certain way of thinking about what a food forest is. I know other people have their own opinions about it, but this all comes down to what my strategy is. And so I think it's fair for me to share with you exactly how I am defining the phrase food forest. First off, I do not mean the dense center of a forest where you've got a large canopy and a lot of shade underneath. That is not what I mean by food forest. And if you try to plant a food forest, planning for a forest where you're going to walk through the middle of all of these tall trees, all of them having fruit, you may very well be disappointed, especially in the cooler climates like where I live. So instead of defining it as the center of a forest, what I'm really talking about when I say food forest is I'm talking about the edge of the forest. The edge of the forest where the forest meets the pasture. And that is the place that I'm talking about when I talk about food forest. But there's no good word for that. And so this is a common definition in permaculture. This is what they're talking about when they're talking about the most productive section of the forest is the sunniest edge. So it's specifically the sunniest edge, the edge that catches the most sun. In the northern hemisphere where I live in the United States, the sunniest edge of the forest will always be on the southern edge. In the southern hemisphere, like in South America, or if you're in Australia, you're looking at the northern edge of your forest as the sunniest edge and the most productive. So those are the ecosystems that we are mimicking when we talk about a food forest. All right, second, there are multiple layers to this edge. So this edge starts with an area that is a lot like a pasture. And like I say, it climbs up to the canopy of the forest, and it does that kind of at an angle. Now, in that angled space, you have, like I said, multiple layers. Now, starting underneath the ground, where you have things like you've got tubers, you've got carrots, you've got really the hyphae of fungi that are taking advantage of that space, and that they send up their fruiting bodies above the ground, but they really live in that soil layer. Above that, you've got your ground cover. So right now we're looking at the edge of a forest and we're building our way up. And so the first thing you're going to see is at the bottom, if you're looking at the ground, is you're going to see the ground cover. That might be wild strawberries. In some cases, in a real forest, you would see grass. But in a food forest, you're going to try and cover that space with edible plants. And so low-lying herbs, other things that will hopefully maintain a low growth habit and will help to keep the soil shaded. They will grow in among your other plants as well and take advantage of the sun, but they will thrive really at the outer edge. Then you'll have your low herbaceous plants, so things that have fruit and vegetables that you would eat, but usually you're talking about things that we would recognize most as annual plants. In some cases, these will be self-seeding annuals. In other cases, these will be plants that come back every year but might die back to the ground. So things like a rhubarb, things like in the case of some of the things that I have, like perennial collards and kales, stuff like that. Tomatoes would fall into that area. Next, you're looking at shrubs, and you're also looking at climbing vines. And those two don't necessarily go right next to each other. You have to kind of be careful what you do with your shrubs and your vines, because vines can really take over inside of a shrub. However, vines can take advantage of mature fruit trees, dwarf and larger, which are a little further back. So that's the layers of the edge of the forest. So that's just kind of clearing up one misconception about what I might mean when I'm talking about a food forest. The second thing that I think people get wrong is they think that they can plant a food forest and then just go away. And then this forest will somehow maintain itself and provide food for generations because you've planted it and established it in a certain way. That is not the case. What is more likely is that you will have to maintain this edge effect over time. Now, it might take less work to maintain it as a forest edge than it would to maintain it as an annual garden, because you will have self-seeding plants, you will have perennial vegetables, and you will have fruit trees, all of which require a little less maintenance than annual varieties. However, to maintain this structure, you will need to put in some work every year. You may need to form the fruit trees in a way to protect them from getting spores bounced up on them from water that drops on some of the lower plants. You may need to thin out some of the varieties that you've planted underneath, and quite often that's just the same as harvesting, but that way you would take advantage of the harvest and at the same time keep them from dominating the space. A good example of that is, say, a walking onion, which will fill up an area if you don't maintain it, and if you don't take it back from places where you might not want it growing. Lots of examples of that. If you're letting, say, dill go to seed, you will have to harvest more dill if you want space for other plants. So those are just some examples of how you would maintain. You would also have to, like your shrubs, your fruiting bushes, you're going to have to trim them to a certain extent, unless you want them to try and take over certain spaces. But once they do, they might become harder to harvest. So you need to think about creating pathways, and you need to think about maintaining the ground covers if you're using mulch, that sort of thing in this space. So it takes maintenance. If you don't put in the maintenance, after a while, you won't have a food forest. You'll have a collection of taller trees with fruit that you can't reach. And that's not really useful to you, although it might be useful to some creatures in the environment. So those are the most important points about how I define a food forest, but I haven't gotten into the mechanics of exactly how a food forest is established and maintained. And I would like to talk more about that in future episodes, so I promise I will. In the meantime, please drop me some comments below. Let me know how you define food forest. Let me know where you think I might have hit the nail on the head, or maybe I got a little off track. Also, please subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying it. Really would love to see more people here and interact with more people on a regular basis. And finally, if you would take a quick look, I need some feedback on the foodforestgardenclub.org website and what you think it needs. If you want to take a trial run of it, there's a 30-day free trial. And after that, it's actually super cheap. It's only $3 a month. But what that does is it gives you the ability to interact personally with me and with other club members. And we have every couple of weeks, we get together on a Zoom chat. We have forums where we answer each other's questions. We have seed swaps, and we have contests and other things. So I'd really love it if you wanted to join us, foodforestgardenclub.org. Please consider it. In the meantime, hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.